Friends, welcome to our monthly Sweet Taste of HeartScapes, a free offering to our community of Reiki practitioners and those who are curious or interested in the system of Reiki, in particular, taught from the perspective of its Japanese origins, why that matters, and how we might integrate that into our life. My name is Michaela. Welcome to HeartScapes. This is my Reiki studio and teaching practice here in Davis, California, Central California. I've been a Reiki practitioner for the past 10 years and teaching for 6, I want to say. Losing a little bit of track of time there. But have been working with this modality for quite some time, most of that time with an emphasis on the original form of the system of Reiki. And one of the things that has offered me is the opportunity to really dig into what this system is intended to give us, to offer us, how it is intended to impact our lives. And my favorite thing is to really make clear for myself and for others the practical, pragmatic, in our daily life application of this work. Because really, if our practice, whether it's Reiki or any other spiritual practice, or meditative practice, wellness practice, if it's not available to us in the midst of our daily life, then it's of limited usefulness to us. So let's see. We are working with the topic of intuition today, and this is a topic that really resonates with a lot of folks. I actually did a full year of monthly classes exploring, it was more, we called it Intuition Lab, and it was more a kind of collective examination of what intuition is and how it shows up in the system of Reiki. And a lot of really fascinating things came out of those discussions and those classes. And so I've been distilling those into these more bite-sized classes for some time. Welcome, Diana. Good to have you here. We just got started.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we're going to kind of continue working with this topic of intuition as we dive in here. And the way that I always like to start is by dropping into some meditation, to have a little bit of a direct experience, to bring ourselves here together into this space, whether you are here live or watching on the replay. Either way, we want to bring ourselves together into this moment and into our intention to work with this topic. And so I'm just going to invite you, wherever you are, to just take a couple of breaths, to pay attention to the sensations in your body, and to put yourself in a posture that feels well supported, where you feel firm, stable, well held by the structures below you, and well held by the structure of your body. Just noticing if you need any small adjustments to help yourself feel more present, more settled, more comfortable. The posture for practice can often be compared to a mountain, a nice, wide, stable foundation, our feet planted on the ground or in a cross-legged position. And then our body rising like the mountain from this stable foundation in an easeful way. So that the muscles of our belly and our shoulders can relax into this structure. And so with your next couple of breaths, I invite you on your exhale to intentionally let a little bit more relaxation come into the muscles of your body, particularly your shoulders and your belly. We often hold our bellies so tightly. So it can take a couple of rounds of invitation. so that our bellies can expand naturally with our breath, can make more space inside, more room for our breath to move freely. And in this way, we bring together the posture of our body and the posture of our breath, our body and our breath moving together fluidly, bringing a greater sense of ease and spaciousness to our body. And from that posture, that collaboration, I invite you to bring your mind into this posture by resting your attention on your breath, by focusing your attention on the movement of your breath in and down. Seeing if you can draw your attention down into your low belly. Following your inhale with your attention and resting in the center of your low belly, the energy center just below your belly button and deep into the center of your body. The energy center known as the Hara in Japan, the first diamond, our grounded and rooted place, the seat of our intuition. Let's just take a couple of breaths into this place. And then from this grounded place, just invite you to consider the question of, in this moment, just for today, how would you describe your relationship with your intuition? How would you describe your relationship to your intuition? And what does that mean to you? Just let me sit with that question for a few rounds of breath. And then gathering up what you have noticed. On your next exhale, I invite you to follow the sensation of your breath back up and out into the spaces around you, into the space together. Welcome back. Now, I'm going to invite you to take a moment to just jot down anything that came up for you around this question of your relationship to your intuition and what does intuition mean for you. And while you do that, I'm going to gather up my little kitten who is up here illegally and needs to be brought downstairs. You probably heard her meowing in the background as we were in this space. So she needs to go downstairs. I will be right back while you are journaling. Just take another moment. And coming to a place of pause. I'm just going to invite you to drop in the chat just anything that came up for you that you'd like to share around your relationship with your intuition, what intuition is to you, and if there's any particular questions that you want to jump into with relationship to intuition and the system of Reiki. And as you take a moment to do that, I'm just going to move into some context for what we're looking at today. I've been really fascinated with the phenomenon of intuition for a long time, and I've studied it through various different lenses. Anecdotally, I am not a scientist, but I am a historian and a passionate Reiki practitioner, and the topic of intuition shows up in a lot of really interesting places. There is a lot of formal study of intuition through scientific lenses, medical lenses, spiritual lenses, business lenses, a lot of interest in this elusive and yet very present phenomenon of our intuition. One of the most interesting things that I ran across when studying intuition from the perspective of business was a study that it asked a lot of questions of CEOs and leaders of major corporations. And one of the questions they asked was, how do you make decisions? And in particular, how do you make decisions when you don't have all of the information that you need or would like in order to make the decision, but you have to make a decision anyway? And by a very overwhelming percentage, the answer was, I go with my gut. And this was surprising to the researchers, but it wasn't surprising to me, because how else would you make a decision if you have not all of the information that you need? But the idea that people would be making, decisions that have multi-million-dollar consequences potentially by going with their gut feeling was really interesting to these researchers and surprising. And it sent them down an interesting rabbit hole of studying what that looks like, which we won't dive into at the moment, but really highlighting the way that intuition is acknowledged, but not well understood. But there are a couple of themes that came up over and over again when looking at intuition around the question of what even is it, right? What is this phenomenon of intuition? So one is that there's a lot of acknowledgement that the intuition seems to be a sort of collaboration between ourselves, our knowledge, our thoughts, our feelings, our physiology, and something outside of ourselves, something we might call unseen. What that unseen thing is debatable. But there's this quality to working with intuition that we saw show up in that study, this idea of having to make decisions or take action or come to an understanding when we don't have the necessary information, that somehow information comes to us outside of ourselves. Secondly, that while the intuition shows up in a lot of different ways in our physiology, and we'll dig into that a little bit today, there's a lot of different ways that our intuition speaks to us. There seems to be a concentration. There's 3 places that are specifically linked with our intuition. One, we heard from those CEOs, and we spent a little bit of time with in our opening, which is the gut, our bellies, the energy center in our bellies, one could say, or the physiology of the gut. Second, of course, is our mind, the thoughts that we have, the insights that come to us sometimes spontaneously. And third, you can probably guess, would be the heart. There's a lot of language that we use that kind of indicates this, right? Go with our gut, knowing something by heart, following our heart. There's a way in which we have experiences that tell us physiologically that these are the places that are involved with our information gathering, our decision making, and our actions. We now know scientifically that there's a very specific connection between these three areas of our body physiologically, that the brain is not the only place in our body that has neurons, that has neurological activity, thinking activity. The other two places where those neurons exist is the heart, specifically the linings surrounding the heart, and the gut. It is believed that there's actually more information flowing from the gut and the heart up to the brain than there is from the brain downward to these other two places. So in other words, our gut and our heart is continuously feeding information to our thinking mind to help us to make decisions. So for you, Diana, intuition has always been really pronounced. Yeah. Learning to push it away and not listen to it. When I followed my intuition, I find peace and I know that it's right for me. Thank you for sharing that. It's a really painful reality that a lot of times we have the experience of tamping down our intuition. Sometimes that's because we don't get validation from outside of ourselves, or perhaps we even get counter validation. Perhaps we get punishment for being intuitive, for following a path that is not easily seen by other people, particularly when that sense is pronounced, as you're saying. My best friend has a very, very pronounced intuition, in the realm of natural psychic ability. And she got a lot of pushback and punishment from her family for that. And so she learned not to express it. And it's part of her path now to reclaim that part of herself and to relearn how to follow it, or really just to choose to. She never forgot, but to risk choosing to not only take action on what her intuition is sharing, but to express that to other people, right? Because sometimes things come through that we have to share with other people, and they want to know, well, how do you know? Right? Because again, there's no clear source of the information. And so that can be a really painful reality. For me, the other reason that we might tamp down our information or intuition is that our intuition might be telling us something that we're not ready for. And that was definitely the case for me before I started studying the system of Reiki, before I made some really difficult choices about my life. I'd been in a really painful, miserable experience for many, many years, one that felt impossible to get out of. My intuition was screaming at me to take action, to change my circumstances, to do the hard thing that I didn't want to do. And because I wasn't ready to do that, I squashed it down. I ignored it. I didn't access it. I didn't take action. And what happens when we do that? Well, a number of things can happen. What happened for me, and what has happened for many people that I've talked with that have expressed similar experiences, is that the intuition, which speaks to us through our bodies, right, through physiological feelings, thoughts, emotions, as well as physiological feelings, is that it tries to get louder, right? It starts to talk to us more loudly. The sensations that we're receiving become more acute, become more uncomfortable, become more painful. Instead of tapping us gently on the shoulder, our intuition starts lobbing rocks at our head. Listen to me. And that can ultimately manifest in illness. It can make us sick to not follow our intuition. And that was my experience. It can also lead us in the direction of trying to quiet that voice through other means, through substances, through other distractions, through dissociation, kind of leaving our bodies just so that we don't feel that sensation. And all of those things not only, cause us distress and illness, but they also cut us off from the web of life, from the fullness of our experience, not as an individual human, but as an individual sovereign being that is also networked with the web of life. Because in the way that I've come to understand it, the way that it would be understood through the system of Reiki, intuition is the collaboration between me as a sovereign person with my own thoughts and feelings and body and the rest of life that I'm inextricably connected to. It's this free flow of information back and forth between the web of life. But our channels have to be open for that. We have to know what we're looking for. We have to have some sense of fluency with the language that our intuition uses to communicate with us. There are certain markers that are common across people as far as how do we know that our intuition is speaking to us. And there are other things that are very specific, right? That's our particular language. There's also really delightful things that come through, again, the outside world, things that we notice, that we pick up on, that give us information. So there's a lot of different ways to understand what our intuition is telling us that are particular, and some that are common. But the question is, to what degree do we know how to listen, and do we know how to trust it? One of the things that comes up right away in this conversation that we're not going to dive into in this particular class, but we have in previous classes, and if you are interested in following this thread, we can connect in other ways. But the question of how do you know that it's your intuition talking to you versus some other voice? That other voice could be habitual behaviors and responses that we've developed over time. It could be the messaging coming from outside of ourselves, from our culture, from our family, from other people close to us. It could be fear, right? A lot of times it's fear. It could be trauma. It could be the ways in which that we've habituated our thinking and our behavior to shield ourselves from painful, difficult experiences. All of those things are really important sources of information, but they're not our intuition. And so part of this work, particularly when we have habituated a shutting down of our intuition, is learning to discern those other voices. So there's a whole other piece of work there that looks different for each of us, that, again, I'm happy to talk about more outside of this class. Let me just see this chat. I'm glad this is resonating with you, Shana. Shanae? I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Let me know if I'm not. Spent most of your life ignoring the insights, gaslighting myself. Oh, yeah, ouch. Feeling like the relationship between myself and my intuition is very new and tentative, regaining trust on both sides. It helps to imagine my intuition coming from my higher self. Shanae, cool. Yeah, exactly. So let's get into that a little bit. Let's look at a framework for understanding intuition through the lens of the system of Reiki from its Japanese origins. It's going to be a super brief introduction to a much more complex topic. These are the topics that I teach to all the time, both in video form on my YouTube channel, in my Reiki classes, and special topics classes like this. So we kind of work with this material a lot in different spaces. Again, so if there's your curiosity, you want to follow that thread, there's many ways to do that. But in short, the best place to begin with understanding the connection between these two things, the system of practice and this phenomenon of the intuition, is to look at the energy map that is present in the system of Reiki from its origins. So the system of Reiki comes out of Japan, and it's built on a foundation of the indigenous spiritual practices of Shinto, the oldest indigenous practices in Japan, and esoteric Buddhism, which came into the country around the 6th and 7th century, and blended really well with the Shinto practices that were existing, and a variety of other related systems of practice within Japan across that history. The system of Reiki essentially became a distillation of these things, a simplification, a system of practice that anybody could pick up and apply in their life. It was one that applied some modern ideas that were coming into Japan in the late 1800s, early 1900s, when the founder of this system lived. And again, really became this distillation, this accessible, simple form of these long-standing spiritual traditions. And so understanding some of the fundamentals of those spiritual traditions is essential for understanding what Reiki actually is. The forms that have grown in the United States and the West in general have some similarities to the original form, but are in many ways very different systems of practice that understand the world, that understand the phenomenon of energy and all of the related things in very different ways. If we look at the original form, one of the kind of simplest ways to start understanding how energy is understood is to look at the system of the three diamonds. And this comes through Shinto practice, and it's essentially the framework for understanding the subtle body that is indigenous to Japan. Most people are familiar with the chakra system to some degree, which was the structure that developed in India for understanding the subtle body. Most spiritual traditions have some framework for understanding the energetic body, however that is described. And while they may all be dealing with the same phenomenon, right? Our energy system, the connection between our unseen places and the rest of the world. The particularities of those systems, how it shows up in particular cultures, particular frameworks with particular people groups in particular historical times matters. It matters for having good integrity in our practices, for understanding things as they are. And it also matters because of the effectiveness that it can bring to our practice to really understand these nuances. So the three diamond system is the system of energy centers that is the foundation of Japanese spiritual practice. And those three energy centers we've already discussed. They are the gut, the belly, first diamond, the head, second diamond, and the heart, third diamond. Worked in that order. Belly, head, heart. In short, the reason being that our belly is connected to our body, it's connected to the earth. It is the energy of structure, of foundation, of safety, of security, of rootedness, of groundedness. It's that tether to the planet, to life, to resourcing. It's our, if we think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's our safety and security. And so we need to tend to that first. And in our modern culture that is so very mind-centric, very brain-centric, mind-centric, spirit-centric, we in particular need help often getting grounded, staying in our bodies, having a relationship with the physicality of our bodies, the subtlety of our bodies, and feeling that sense of safety and grounding and stability that comes with really, really feeling our feet on the ground. So we work with the first diamond first, known as the hara in Japanese, which simply means belly, but is referring again to this energy center. It's located just below the belly button and in the center of our body. Once we have that firm foundation set, like the foundation of the mountain, we can rise, we can bring our attention upward, we can build up to the second diamond in the mind, which is the territory of spaciousness, of vision, of possibility, of space, literal physical space, but also spaciousness, right? The space around us, the space inside of us. And those two places come into harmony with each other when we practice with them. If you imagine like a tree, right, that has roots and it has branches, and the proportion between them is very fixed. The reach of its branches is in proportion to the depth and width of its roots. So they support each other in a way that gives the organism strength, stability, balance, and enables it to do what it needs to do. Same with us, energetically, physically. We work with the second diamond after forming the first. They come into alignment with each other. And when we feel that harmony, that alignment between these two spaces, then we can come to the third diamond, the heart, the territory of compassionate connection, of courage. This is where we really start to feel our connection to the web of life. We feel ourselves to be bigger than this one discrete body, this one organism. It's where we can really lean into compassion in its truest sense, to be with suffering, to be with our own, to be with other people, to be with in general, to broaden our awareness of what it means to be ourselves and what it means to be connected. This isn't a static process, meaning you don't just do this one time and then you're good. Right? If that were so, many more of us would be enlightened beings. We would just be walking through life perfectly balanced, right? Like so many things, it's dynamic, right? There's times when we feel very grounded and when we're ready to move into more spaciousness. There's times when we feel cut off from our heart and we need to go back into that balancing. There's times when we feel really, really present in our heart, but maybe a little bit off balance in the other places, right? And so part of the practice of the system of Reiki is to gain a fluency with our own energy map and to be able to assess in a given moment, what do I need in order to feel fully present, in order to feel unattached and unidentified with fear, with anger, to feel grateful, to feel true to myself, to feel compassionate. These are the precepts of the system of Reiki. Just for today, I anger not, I worry not, I'm grateful, I'm true to myself, I'm compassionate for myself and others. And these precepts give us a description of the outcomes that we can experience and the way that we can assess, am I balanced in my energy? And again, this is dynamic. It's a process that changes day to day. We need different things, different days, depending on what we're dealing with. And the system of Reiki gives us a series of practices that we can employ that hopefully we have practiced with often enough that they're just available to us when we need to bring them in, to bring in that sense of balancing so that we can be our full and true self. We can be as integrated as possible and therefore make decisions and take actions and communicate and be in ways that are true to our fullest self and therefore true also to the rest of life. It's my belief, it's my perception that when we're really in full balance, those three diamonds, those three brains, if you will, these three places that we now know to have neurological activity from a biological standpoint, when we're balanced in those places, we're open to the web of life, we're exchanging information, then the decisions that we make not only benefit us, but they must also benefit the life around us because of that connection. In a sense, that would be the way that we would understand intuition inside of the system of Reiki. Our three energy centers, main energy centers, of course, there's many energy centers in our body, and there are practices in this tradition that work with many of them, particularly the ones in the hands and the feet, and other places. But this main map that we work with, when it's in balance, when we are integrated in our body, our breath, our mind, then we are maximizing our ability to be open to our intuition. From there, the question of, well, how do I recognize my intuition comes up. But I just want to pause there and just take a couple of breaths, see if there's any questions that have come up. Just make sure that this is resonating with you, that it's making sense. And if you've encountered a different way of understanding the system of Reiki, I'd love to hear that as well. So I'll just take a little bit of a pause here from Taki Taki Taki.
I learned Reiki 1 and 2 with both the 3 diamonds and the chakra system. So it's just a little confusing to me to sort it all out, but it helps a lot just to focus on the 3 diamonds. It makes sense, and then potentially add the chakras in, but that makes more sense because I couldn't figure out, well, what's the difference. And even when I asked in class, I didn't quite understand the difference in how they both came into play with Reiki.
Yeah, I love that you shared that. And, it kind of brings forward an important piece, which is that, when we are working within systems of practice that are foreign to us, so I'm a white American. These are systems of practice that, while, we live in America, this is the melting pot, right? We've encountered these ideas, probably, possibly. I grew up in Berkeley, California. It was all there. It was all
Yeah.
around, right? In a very confusing manner. And in a way that what I now understand, where there was not a whole lot of regard for the specificity of particular aspects of specific systems of practice that came from a particular time and place.
Yeah.
And what I've come to understand is that it's incredibly important, if we're going to step into a system of practice that is not our own, even if we're going to step into a system of practice that is our own, right? Any system of practice, the relationship that we have with it is important. And the level of understanding that we have about the thing as itself, right? And so what is this thing when it is most itself, right?
Yeah.
So that includes historical understanding, cultural context, and so on, to the degree that we can, right? We're not perfect. I'm not perfect. I am not Japanese. I will never understand the system of Reiki in the way that others can. But I can do my best to be diligent, following the fourth precept. Just for today, I am diligent, translated different ways depending on how you look at it, to be diligent in understanding these things. And then when we do that, then we can bring these systems together if we choose to, if it feels right to do that, in ways that are savvy, that are fluent, that are skilled, that allow us to really understand, why would we employ this one at this point? Why might we bring them together? Why might we not bring them together? And so when we look at just this one aspect of how do we understand the energy system, 3-diamond system, chakra system, right? It's helpful to understand that, firstly, essentially, we're talking about the same phenomenon, the energy system. It's being understood and worked with very differently in those two systems. And both have merit and value, right? My understanding of the chakra system is really valuable to me because of the way in which it maps onto our physical reality, emotional, mental, and spiritual concepts. So it's helpful to me to think about the solar plexus, right, the third chakra, as this seat of my personality and my boundary setting and my strong yes, my strong no, my center of action in a certain sense. That's helpful for me to know that. It's helpful for me to think about, the fifth chakra and its relationship to communication, right? All of that is really helpful. I have chosen to primarily work with the 3-diamond system for a variety of reasons that don't have to be other people's reasons. But the two systems definitely inform each other in my practice in a practical way, right? But we want to be able to understand them, right? Well, what is this and what is this and why would I do this one and not this one, or both of them, right? So happy to answer any other questions about that. But I would say that, one of the main values to me of working with the 3-diamond system is the way that it makes me feel, right? And the way that it helps me understand the fluctuations in how I feel, based on these concepts of grounding and foundation, of spaciousness and vision and connection. And it's very logical to me. It makes sense from my experience why we would work with them in that order. So cool.
Yeah, that's super helpful.
Yeah. Let's see this chat from Shanae. So Western culture has this mix and match way of interpreting and using Eastern healing modalities. It's always made me feel a little weird. I learned Reiki using the chakra system. I'm not sure if that's the way I want to provide Reiki in the future, because they come from two different cultures. What you say definitely seems like a more respectful and responsible way of taking both into consideration. Yeah, I mean, so like I said, I'm a historian by training, and so I can go down rabbit holes like really easily with how these things came to be. But one thing that I will share as briefly as I can for context here is that the historical moment that the system of Reiki was developed inside of the late 1800s, early 1900s Japan was an incredibly dynamic and chaotic in many ways and challenging, but also really amazing time in Japanese history. The feudal system had been formally ended. The borders to the Western world were being opened formally for the first time. And so there was a flood of foreign thought coming into the country. And in response, a kind of a lockdown on a very nationalistic form of Japanese identity that like really was like wanting to boundary off what is Japanese and what is not. Inside of that context, even Buddhism, which again had been in this country since the 6th century, had been very deeply entrenched inside of Japanese culture, very intimately woven with indigenous Shinto practice. The form of Buddhism known as Shingon was developed in the 9th century as a very specifically Japanese form. Practicing and teaching Buddhism was made outlaw in the time of Mikao Usui, the founder of Reiki, because of this nationalistic, Shinto is our national religion. You can do Buddhism if you want to, privately in your house or other forms of practice, but officially, we are a Shinto nation. And so, one of the ways that shows up is that the Buddhist aspects of Reiki got very cloaked. They got very secularized in a certain way. And there was a certain blending of thought. Again, there was a lot of different, systems of thought coming into the country at that time. It's certainly possible, likely, that Mikao Usui was familiar with the chakra system and, had possibly utilized it. We don't know that. But what we do know is that he would have been deeply entrenched in this system, three diamond system. And you can see it all over the system of Reiki when we look at the symbols and mantras, when we look at the particular forms of meditations that were developed, different writings and so on that we have, it's very clear that that's what's going on. And so it's just, again, helpful to know that. It's also helpful to know why certain aspects of the system were changed when it came into the West. So much to say about that. But I think the simplest context is that it came into the US through Hawaii during World War II, when we were actively at war with Japan. And so you can imagine that a Japanese woman in a dominantly Japanese territory of the United States, not yet a state, occupied territory, that was actively being forcibly annexed, stolen from the indigenous Hawaiian people at the time, that she could not actively teach a Japanese art without cloaking it in certain Western forms, which she did. Hawaii Takata, the mother of Western Reiki, made some very important and interesting changes to the system that were necessary. Very grateful to her for that. It was a very tenacious thing to do. It's what oppressed people often have to do, cloak their traditions so that they aren't outright destroyed, but they are changed and appropriated in ways that can become problematic. And so we can appreciate that and be grateful for that. And now we can do our best to reach back and to understand what it was originally. That's not to say that Western forms of Reiki don't have benefit, that there aren't valuable systems that have developed here, but I would argue that they're actually different systems and that they should perhaps be called something different because they're very different. We don't have to go into that. I'm glad the history is fascinating. Sometimes I feel like I geek on that a little bit too much. Cool. Okay, so we have about 15 more minutes, circling us back to intuition. So really, in this limited time, what we can do is, what I wanted to do is to offer this framework for understanding intuition from the lens of Reiki, from the lens of the three diamonds, and to offer a meditation that very specifically builds our intuition, among other things. all of the practices within the system of Reiki in its original form positively benefit our intuition. But the three diamonds practice, known as Joshin Kokyoho, is a really powerful place to begin. And partly because this practice, which is the name Joshin Kokyoho, is translates as a method to focus the mind. Where do we focus the mind? Just like in the practice, we essentially started, we did the first part of this practice when we opened, drawing our attention into the first diamond, into the belly, into that grounded place. And that in and of itself can be challenging, especially when we're not accustomed to bringing our attention into our body. So I want to acknowledge that for those of us who are working through trauma or who have a habit of kind of dissociating from our body or just really not paying attention, for those of us who experience chronic illness or pain, like paying attention inside of our body can be not a good thing, right? It can be a painful thing, a difficult thing, something we've perhaps never even considered doing, right? So it can be a big hurdle for some of us, not for everyone. It can be not a big hurdle, but I just want to acknowledge that, and that piece can be a major step, right? To train ourselves to come into our body, notice what's there, and then through this practice, give ourselves the sensation of there being enough space inside of us. So particularly important if we experience discomfort or pain in our body. The sensation of there being enough room to hold whatever it is we're experiencing and to reach out into that web of life from that grounded place, that rooted place. Imagery of rooting into the earth is really valuable. There's a lot of nature imagery inside of this work, so that we feel more resourced, more able to kind of be with whatever it is that we're experiencing. That's essential to be able to do this in order to follow our intuition, especially if we've been habituated to ignoring our intuition. Because if we're ignoring our intuition, we're ignoring the sensations of our body, just period, because our intuition speaks to us through our body. So that is the first step. And then from there, we can start really paying attention to what is the language of my intuition? What do I actually feel? And start to untangle, again, what is my intuition and what is these other voices that might be present? So let's see. I think what I would love to do for our last little piece of time is to just walk us through that meditation again. I'd love for you to leave with something practical that you can work with, and that you can go back to the video and walk through. I will follow up with a link to another video that goes through a longer, more in-depth guidance of this practice, since we don't have a ton of time today. But I want you to leave with some direct experience with this material that we've been talking about. Again, this being the kind of starting point for working with our intuition through this lens. Also, the starting point of working with the system of Reiki from its Japanese origins. So we accomplished two things. So I'm gonna once again invite you to put your body in a position that feels supported. Again, remembering as a metaphor, as a guide, the image of the mountain, wide, stable foundation, gentle rise upward. So a nice straight back, as much as our body is comfortable with that. We don't want to be rigid. We don't want to tense up the muscles of our body. If we need more support from pillows, from chairs to help us feel that sense of upright easefulness with a strong foundation, then we want to do that. Because we want to allow our body to be soft and firm at the same time. Our skeleton gives us a really beautiful, firm structure. Our muscles can naturally support that structure without tensing, becoming rigid. So we want to really find that point of stability, of easeful uprightness. of inviting our bellies to relax as much as they're willing in this moment. So that as we breathe, our bellies gently move out and in the way that a baby breathes, the way that we breathe when we're sleeping. Our breath moving in and down into our belly and gently out. Then resting our attention on the sensation of our breath, letting our breath draw our attention inward. Our body, our breath, and our mind aligning with each other, integrating with each other, moving together to focus our attention in the center of our low belly, just below our belly button, deep into the center of our body. The first diamond. Let's just take a couple of breaths to draw our attention here. And as you breathe in and down, drawing your attention down to the rich, fertile darkness of your belly, the nourishing soil of your rooted places. I invite you to imagine or sense that right at the center of your low belly, you find a spark of life. Perhaps you envision this spark in your mind or sense it in your body, or just feel it like a thought or an emotion. A spark of life, bright, luminous, and clear within the fertile darkness of your center. This spark shining in all directions, clear, unsoiled, clean, and bright. This spark of your true self, your whole and true and alive self, your point on the web of life. No matter how many layers of distraction or pain or beliefs that we cover it up with, it is always here, shining bright, luminous, and clear in all directions from your center. And as we bring our attention to this spark, those layers begin to clear away, dissolve away, and that spark grows brighter. On your next round of breath, as you inhale your attention down into this place, sense or imagine your spark of life growing brighter, expanding in all directions. And as you exhale, it continues to expand, to fill you, to surround you, to fill the spaces within and around, to give you a sense of growing bigger and more spacious inside. Let's just practice this visualization for a few rounds of breath. Following your inhale, in and down, connecting with your spark of life in your center, sensing or imagining it grow brighter, expanding in all directions like a sun, filling you, surrounding you. Each breath, a pulse of light, a wave of light from your center outward, cleansing and clearing every cell in your body. Let's breathe in this way for a few moments. Drawing your attention to your breath, calling your focus to the sensation of your breath moving in and down. Drawing your focus into this seed of light in your center, expanding in all directions, radiating from you your Reiki spiritual energy, the phenomenon in the world, in you. You are Reiki. You don't need anybody else to give it to you. It emanates from your center in all directions, at all times, even when we're distracted. And it reaches into the web of life, into the spaces around you, and collaborates, exchanges information, exchanges energy, resources. It is your intuition at work. And so I invite you from this place to ask yourself the question, how does my intuition talk to me? How do I know when I'm feeling my intuition? What are the sensations in my body, the thoughts in my mind, the emotions? What do I notice that tells me my intuition is at work? You can let this be an open question. There might not be immediate answers. But in this moment, we're planting the seed of this question so that you can move from this place and notice, collect data, write it down, observe the outcomes. How does your intuition talk to you? How do you know? And so with the seeds of these questions planted, I invite you to follow your breath on an exhale back up and out, knowing that this spark of life in your center continues to shine even when you're not focused on it. But it is our focus, our attention that allows us to come fully online. And so we practice Joshin Kokyuho, a method to focus our mind. Giving yourself a gesture of completion, coming back into this space together. Welcome back. So we are at the end of our time for this class. However, I am very happy to stay after and answer any questions or share anything else that you like. But we will formally end our class time here at 11 o'clock. Really grateful to have you with us, with this practice. I hope that it has served you in some way. And again, if you have any questions or anything else you want to share or discuss, I'm happy to stay.
I don't have any questions, but I just wanted to say thank you.
Yeah.
This has been great.
Absolutely. So yes, YouTube channel, deep dive. I'll send you that link out. I am starting my next round of Reiki 1 Shoden on Sunday. That is an 8-week class that walks through level 1 of Reiki from the perspective of its Japanese origins. If that is something that is of interest, I will put that in the follow-up email as well. I offer that class formally every 6 months in July and January. It's part of our year program that walks through the entire system of Reiki, but Reiki 1 can be taken as a standalone class. I also teach one-on-one classes if folks want to work outside of that time frame or want to work on something specific. And I'll include information on how to learn about that if that is of interest in the follow-up email that I will send in the next couple of days.
Thank you. I signed up for your trauma informed class in September.
Oh, I
Is
know
it
your
September?
name.
Yeah,
Yeah, I knew your
yeah,
name was familiar.
yeah, yeah. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, yeah, me too. That's a great one.
Yeah.
All right, friends, thanks so much for being here, and I look forward to being with you again when the time is right.
Thank you.
Mhm.